In this exercise, we're going to discuss assembly design approaches. This is the start of the assembly chapters, and this chapter is really going to be very conceptual, so I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet so you don't have to listen to me yap a whole lot. And we're going to go through some very quick concepts here. The first concept is the approach of how to create a part in Inventor. You know how to create an actual part, and you understand how that part works as far as adding, extrusions and fillets and chamfers and sweeps and lofts and all that kind of good stuff. Once you get that done, then you're ready to start putting that into an assembly. The way Inventor works is it has different files for different environments. So all your parts are .ipt files, and all your assemblies are .iams, or Inventor assemblies and Inventor parts. The Inventor assembly really doesn't have any information in it. It's only a database of parts. The way that this works is we put these parts in here, and then we hold them together. We constrain them using assembly constraints. We constrain them so we can remove the degrees of freedom. Now, one of my biggest complaints with Inventor is they have sketch constraints and assembly constraints. Assembly constraints are a little bit different. They do hold the part together and constrain it, but they're more about what I consider real-world assembly. With an assembly, we could take and we can move this part. Say you had this part laying on your workbench. You can grab this hydraulic reservoir and move it around. If you don't have this lid and gasket and screws attached to this assembly, when you move it, this stuff would just move off all willy-nilly on its own. But you notice that that moves with the assembly. And the reason is because we've used constraints to lock this thing down. So I can see here I've used the insert constraint to lock this bolt into this lid, and the lid's locked to the gasket, and the gasket's locked to the part. So what that means in real life is if you were to bolt this down, and you were to drop kick this thing across your garage, more than likely this lid's not going to come off. You're going to break the part before this lid just falls off. Same with Inventor. We're locking this down. Inventor doesn't care where the part is, it just understands that this gasket's attached to the base, and then the lid's attached to the gasket, and the bolts are attached to the lid. So this is a very real-world type of how Inventor works and how it locks everything together. The design approach about this is how do you go about creating this? First one is called the bottom-up, and the bottom-up design approach basically means that we go through and we create every single part in our assembly. I know exactly what this base component is going to look like, exactly what this fitting is going to look like, gasket, lid, bolts, everything. I can design them one by one, and then I can go back and assemble them after I get everything done. The next one's called the top-down approach. What that means is I start out at the assembly level, and I start building components. So I would build this base feature, so to speak, in a part file inside of the assembly and say this reservoir base looks like this. And then I say it looks like this, so the gasket needs to look like this, the lid needs to look like this, and these screws need to look like this hole that's in this, fittings need to look like this shaft. And I manually go through and I create everything in the context of the assembly. In the real world, the way I work, the way most people work, is what they call the middle-out approach. And notice I said there was two different ways of designing. There was the bottom up and top down. Well, the middle out is exactly what it says. It's kind of the best of both of them. It means you start out with several known components. We would start out with this base. We'd maybe add in these fittings and screws from a library. You have the content center where you can place these in. They're already created for you. But things like this gasket, well, it's going to be custom fitted to this base. So we could create it in the assembly and reference the shape of this base so that if I turn this off so you can see it, this gasket is exactly the same size and shape as the top of this base reservoir. Turn the lid back on, then we build the lid based on the gasket. And what that means is it's going to reference each other so that if this thing ever grows and gets longer, the gasket and the lid will go with it. But at the same time, I didn't have to know exactly what every single part looked like, nor did I have to create every single part. So I can use this mixed bag and reuse fittings from designs I've already done. Maybe I designed something very similar to this last time. It's just a different size. Last time it was 1 inch. This one's only going to be 3/4. So I can reuse components. I can use library components. And then I can create things that I know are going to be unique. If I had some kind of temperature gauge or pressure gauge that was going to be completely outside of this, that had nothing to do with how this looks, it was just going to be a threaded gauge that screws into the side, I could create that as a separate part or subassembly without having to know what this looks like. So you can create these different components in different groupings and then put them together. So that's kind of the middle out approach to designing with Inventor. There's no right or wrong way. Most of the time I tell people to start with the bottom up, start designing as much as you can. And whenever you don't know answers, then that's when you start with the middle out. So we start designing the knowns. We get all the absolute knowns done. Anything that's going to have to rely on information from other parts, and we start creating it in the context of the assembly. So go around, you can think about how that works. I will add this hydraulic res into the file so you can take a look at it and see how this was created. It's hard to tell the design approach because there's no way to say, hey, this was created this way. Once you get done with an assembly, you'll never know how it was created. It doesn't matter what order it was placed in or anything like that. You'll never really know how the designer thought about it whenever he was doing it. But the idea behind this is you want to put as much design intent in here and you want to take away as much freedom so that it locks everything together.